And seats of honor. But I want to start by telling you a little story. This week was Diwali. If you don't know this was a festival that it's a festival of lights that originated in Hinduism in India, but has spread to many religions and many countries. And because it was Diwali, my wife Kristen, who's a school librarian, was telling a lot of stories from India and had a lot of books from India. And one of the books she shared with me this week, I decided I was going to tell you about because it's a true story. And it's a true story. You may have heard this, but I had not. It's a true story of a man named Dashrath Manjhi. And Dashrath Manjhi lived in a very poor community. And this story is really wrapped up in the caste system in India. And his village was one of the lowest caste. And so they had no services there. They had no medical services. They had no schools. They had to travel, everyone in their village. And the closest services and schools were actually through these very dangerous hills. And so a lot of the children had just stopped going to school. And one day his wife was traveling through these hills and she was injured. She was badly injured because it was a very rough path. And the medical services were so far away that she passed away before she could get to a doctor. And so he, in his grief and in his frustration, and probably even within his anger, he traded his last goat for a chisel and a hammer. And he went out and he started carving the mountain with a chisel and a hammer. And everybody thought, what a waste of time. He did this for 22 years. He chiseled away at the mountain. And when Kristen read this story, one of the kids in her class, I think, asked the question that I had, which is, why didn't anybody help? And some of them did. You know, sometimes the story says that people would bring him food. One time he found a new chisel and hammer waiting for him that he didn't expect. Sometimes he said he would come and think it was maybe just a little further than he had left it the day before. But after 22 years, he carved a road that made access to all those things that his community needed. And he finished it. And it is still there. And it is still in use, and it is called the Dashrath Manjhi Road. It is named after him to this day. Now, to me, it's easy to see a connection between his story and the story of our widow who puts 2 small coins in the treasury. Like her, Dashrath Manjhi was overlooked and he was discounted. He was looked down on. But what both of them had to offer made all the difference. As much as people might say, this doesn't matter, what you are doing, what you have to offer doesn't matter, it didn't make it matter any less. It had the ability to transform lives, the smallest of things. Now, the story of the widow, I will tell you, I've always had mixed feelings about this story. Right? She goes, she puts 2 tiny copper coins in the treasury, and Jesus says, wow, look, she gave all she had. And I always thought, is that a good thing? That feels like a bad thing, right? Doesn't she need that? And I've always struggled with that. And right before this, in the passage we heard about religious leaders and about how terrible they are, one of the things Jesus says that we do, and I want to say they, but I'm going to say we, one of the things we do is we devour widows' houses. He said it's one of the terrible things we do. And then he watches a widow give her last coins away and says, she's giving more than anybody. So which is it? Is Jesus saying this woman is great for doing this, or is he saying that the scribes and the religious leaders are bad for letting her do it? Or encouraging her to do it? Right? She put in everything she had. To me, it always makes me think of like the TV evangelists from the 80s selling prayer handkerchiefs. And it was like, if you give enough, then you're going to be blessed. It's that kind of theology, right? Just keep giving more and then you'll be blessed. Then God's going to appreciate you. And it feels like this story is there to justify that kind of manipulation. But here's the thing, and this is the way I interpret almost every Bible story, so it's going to sound a little familiar. But the thing is, this is another example of a story that has a different message depending on who you are. Depending on who you are in the story has something very different to say to you. The problem is we often try to interpret the stories from a different perspective, right? We put ourselves in the place of the widow because she's the hero of the story. Jesus says she's great, so we imagine ourselves as this poor widow. But that's probably not who we are in this story. But the message, if you are the widow, is clear. The message is, yes, the world overlooks you, the world undervalues you, the world may even look down on you. But what you have to offer matters. That's the message, and it's clear. What you have to offer, however little it may be, if you think that you don't have anything to offer, Jesus is saying it's not true. Because whatever you have to offer, however small, however meager, in any way, your time, your talent, your money, whatever it is, it matters. And not only does it matter, it's a sign of even greater faith. It's better than people who give more, because it's a sign of greater faith. What you have to contribute is worthwhile, right? That's the message if you're the widow. But what if you're a person of wealth and power? Like many of us. What's the message? A lot of us interpret it, well, if the widow's gift matters, then mine really matters. I'm amazing. And that is not the point of the story. Jesus is saying a word that is hard to hear. He's saying that when you give, it should be a sacrifice. That it should matter to you that you gave it. If it's easy, then what does it mean? So what does that mean? We give until we get noticed? Is that it? That's not the message. We give until it hurts? That's not the message. The message is, and this is what's hard to hear and it's hard to judge, we give until it matters. Until it matters to us and until it matters to the world. That's the message. But those aren't even the only two groups. This definitely has a message for religious leaders, not to get so caught up in themselves and give long, boring sermons. But there's another message, and it's the most important one because it's who Jesus was talking to when he said it. Do you remember who he told this to? He didn't tell it to the widow. He didn't tell it to the scribes. He told it to his followers. He called his disciples together to tell them this, and that's all of us. Right? If you're in this room, you're in that group because it just means somebody who's trying to learn something from what Jesus has to teach us. That's who this story is for. So what's the message for us? This is the hardest one, I think. Because this is a message for faithful people who think they're right, which is a lot of us. It's that whoever you overlook, whoever you undervalue, whoever you look down on, God sees their value. Not only does God see their value when you look down on them, but God celebrates their value and what they have to offer. Your privilege and your position of faith, even as disciples, it was a position of authority that mattered to them. He said, doesn't make you faithful or good or righteous. This widow has more faith than you. So do not look down on anyone. Do not overlook. Do not undervalue. Remember who you serve. You serve God and you serve the people around you. Now, when I think about this story, I can't help wondering about the people I look down on. I'm not supposed to look down on anybody. The story's really clear about it, but I do, if I'm honest with myself. I do. And I belittle people. I think about who I look down on. I'll tell you, I'll just tell you. I look down on people who want to legislate against educating people about our history of racism because it might make them feel bad. And I look down on people who say, I'm doing vaccine research by listening to the Joe Rogan podcast. And I've got a list when I really am honest with myself. When I'm honest with myself, when I'm just alone with me and my prayers, my list is too long. And it doesn't mean that I have to think those people are right or that I should stop fighting for what I believe in. But I better stop undervaluing the people that I am in community with. That's the message that I get from this story. What I think about is if I really want to believe it, I want to say, well, I know things that some people don't know. Well, then I have more responsibility. Whenever we have more than someone else, it doesn't mean they're worse. It means our responsibility is greater. Our call of what we need to do is greater. That's what it means. Doesn't mean somebody else is of less worth. It means our job is even bigger. That's what God says to us. Paul reminds us, one of the scriptures, I wouldn't say it's my favorite scripture, even though I love to say that, but it's something that I come back to all the time. He said, look, you want to judge somebody for doing something wrong? When you judge others, you condemn yourself because you, the judge, are doing the very same things. That's what he says. And we want to say, well, no, I'm not doing the exact same thing. But what Paul means is you're judging them for being wrong. And you've been wrong. So every time you judge somebody, every time you undervalue somebody, every time you look down on somebody, Paul says, we condemn ourselves. Because that's who we are. We're all flawed. We're all in need. We're all struggling. We're all challenged. And the point of this story is to say, don't get so caught up in yourself. That's how the two parts go together about the religious leaders and the widows. It's all about this notion. It's not just about us, right? That's the difference between righteous and self-righteous. If it builds us up, it's self-righteous. If it builds others up, it's actually righteous. That's the message of the gospel. That's the message of this story. That you matter, that we matter, and the widow matters. God's love is not for a select group of people who have the right answers. It's for everyone. Thanks be to God. Amen.